right, well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for being here. Tonight's topic is that Jesus' resurrection is out of the box, and that'll make a lot of sense to you by the time we're done. We've got a lot of material to cover. We're going to bob and weave through a lot of topics. But the specific topic is the idea of second burials performed by the Jewish people of the Second Temple, Israel. How many have heard of the word ossuary? All right, I got a full house that understand. How many knew about that word before meeting me? Okay. There's been a lot of Christians who don't know what an ossuary is. And of course, it comes from the Latin word os. If you've got osteoporosis, that means your bones are weak. So an ossuary is a bone box. And it's a practice that develops during the time of Christ, about 100 years before Christ is on the scene, and completely, not completely, but almost is completely obliterated after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So this will be our topic for tonight. Now, let's get to a really interesting point in talking about our favorite archaeologists. You know that Indiana Jones was hired by the U.S. government to obtain a very important artifact of history. And it was important to the U.S. government that it did not fall into the wrong hands because of the particular power that was associated with this object. And so we're actually opening up the door to a subplot of life about who's really running the show on a lot of the things that are happening in archaeology. Archaeology is happening everywhere across the world. But talk about a focus of intrigue, and in fact, a focus of financial gain is the archaeology that happens in Bible lands and specifically in the nation of Israel. There is so much archaeology going on there that nearly every week something has been located and has significant biblical import. Now, I want you to know that I'm going to go to a very dangerous place right now. Israel is very interested in uncovering its history because of political means. The more they can show that their people have occupied that land and that their history and development of their culture and their language and their civilizations have been on that land, that gives them a lot of strength to say, other people don't need to say that this is their land, this is our land. That there is a political aspect to archaeology, just as there was with our friend Indiana Jones, right? He went off and found his object of import. The U.S. government said, thank you very much, we'll take care of that. All right? Now, of course, the end of the movie is completely flummoxed and says, we got to study. This is history. This is important. But it's just the greatest way to end a movie, just to let it all hang out there. But let's just say that so many discoveries take place that actually undermine Israel's narrative. Then what happens? So there's forces that are involved in archaeology. There's money involved in archaeology. There is power and influence involved in archaeology. So it's a very tender topic. Now, as Christians, we love history. We love archaeology. We love literature. We love science. But oftentimes we have problems with historians, archaeologists, authors, and scientists. Because all of us have an agenda. All of us are working to do something with the research and the things that we want to bring to light. For example, the world's #1 best-selling archaeological magazine is called Biblical Archaeology Review. I don't know if you've ever seen the magazine or read. Here we've got this wonderful drone shot of Beit Shan. Beit Shan is the place where King Saul and his sons were posted on the wall, murdered in this location. It's a lot of that city exists and is under archaeological exhumation as we speak. A wonderful ancient town, Beit Shan. So, but Archaeology Review suffers from something that a lot of professionals suffer from: publish or perish. You've got to keep on finding things to tell people about. And when you publish, your archaeologists sometimes bring different ideas to light. Now, a lot of Christians would look at biblical archaeological review and say, hey, they're on our side. But I tell you, some of their archaeologists have the most interesting ideas about history and the things that they find. And it's so interesting to read the letters to the editor of Biblical Archaeology Review. This is the last article I'm going to read from this magazine, because they're not impressed or happy with what an archaeologist has determined with their particular find. It's just a very interesting world where there's a lot of give and take. And that's the society we live in. All voices should be able to be brought to the table. They really should. In our society, we should have a parliamentary view of society. Everyone has a voice. You make your case. You defend your case. And if the evidence is with you, then that's something that should be given more credence than something that is fanciful. So here we are. We're going to talk about Christianity and the resurrection. And of course, the resurrection, as was alluded to by a pastor, is the fuel of the engine of Christianity. If there is no Jesus rising from the dead, bodily, physically, then the scripture says of those who would believe such a thing, if it wasn't true, that we are the people most to be pitied in the world. We have no forgiveness of our sins, which is an important thing for us, and that we have no hope for the future. That we're just, as Christopher Niswonger likes to say, we're just meat bags running around, and we're just going to expire, and the only purpose for life is to make more meat bags. But there's no purpose to life. Jesus comes into this world and he says, I am here to redeem this place, and I'm here to make people a part of my kingdom, and I am going to do a work that's going to raise people not just spiritually, but there's going to be a day of physical resurrection. And just as Jesus was physically resurrected, he intends to resurrect all humanity and to establish once and for all his reign over heaven and earth. Jesus' resurrection changes everything for the believer, because by it he declares to be king over every realm of existence, and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess to the glory of the Father that Jesus Christ is Lord. So the resurrection of Jesus impacts your politics, it impacts what church you join, it impacts how you react with your neighbor. It means everything. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity probably would exist as some kind of interesting social group. People would like its morality and maybe its consistent worldview. It would help them to understand the Babylon Bee. But if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then we could pretty much move on and look at something else. All right. Now, one of the things I'd like to begin this presentation with is a very wonderful quote that I had when James Montgomery Boyce, some of you old-timers remember this man, he spoke at my church in Orange County, California, and he did a presentation, and he was alluding to some archaeological evidence. At the time, this is, 20 years ago, maybe more. And he said, I want you to imagine a line. And on this line, there's a scale that's going back and forth. And on one side of the scale is the category problems and difficulties that we have with the Bible. And on the other side is things that have been resolved and things that we understand better. You understand my scale? And he says, over time, with the work of historians, archaeologists, literary agents, epigraphers, that scale continues to narrow on the margin of problems that we have with the Bible, things that we don't understand about the Bible, things that were difficult to believe about the Bible. That side is shrinking the more that time goes on based on archaeological evidence. And I'll give you a couple examples just to whet our appetite. What does the historical record reveal? What do we unearth from the ground? One particular thing that was of interest was the individual known as Pontius Pilate, a prefect of Judea, who came in a line of prefects of Judea. And for many, many years, probably around the time of the documentary hypothesis, liberal scholars said there's no such person as Pontius Pilate. We've never heard of him. There's no evidence that he ever existed or lived. But lo and behold, I like saying it like that, in the early 60s, there in Caesarea Maritima, they unearthed a stone, which on the back of the stone had the name Pontius Pilate and a dedication stone that he had for a temple built to Tiberius. Suddenly, you know what? Pontius Pilate is a real person. Did you know that on this ring is the name Pilate? This ring was also unearthed at the Herodium, south of Bethlehem, also in the early 60s, was cataloged, documented, and stuck in a drawer. Not until only a few years ago did someone pull it out, clean it up, and say, hey, this right here says Pilato. Oh, wait, this way. Pilato. I'm backwards because I'm looking at this. All right? And then there's what we call a crater or an amphora in the middle of it. You need to remember this. Just telling you. Foreshadow. That's an Easter egg right there. All right? So we have, not only did Josephus and Suetonius and Tacitus and all these, Philo, reference these individuals, but now we've got hard facts about a person named Pontius Pilate. Very rare name, probably more rare than Moorlach, and evidence of his existence, that someone was in the Herodium wearing a copper ring, maybe one of his soldiers, that gave him freedom and access to the Herodium, which was a huge fortress built by Herod the Great. Here's another thing that was very interesting about the way that archaeology works. Remember, this was found in the early 60s and didn't come to light until a few years ago. There are things that have been found that they're working on right now that are going to be very impressive. This one in particular was found in a burnt Jewish synagogue in En-Gedi. Right here is a Torah scroll, and here's the reference of how much of it was there, and it was burned in a fire. Well, thankfully, someone said, let's just store it and catalog it and say we've got it. It's no use to anybody. Until one day, as technology has advanced, someone essentially said, you know what, with an MRI machine, I can unpeel that. And so with laser scanning, and I'm not sure exactly what the machine is that they used, here's the very first chapter of the book of Exodus, which incidentally and very cutely is all about burnt offerings. All right, so here's this crusted over charcoal scroll of Leviticus, and you know the story by now if you've been raised in the church. This document, written before 300 AD, tell me how well it comports with the Bible that you have in your pew right now. Almost spot for spot identical. There's been no change in reference in any way of the book of Leviticus. The book that was held by people 2,000 years ago is the same exact book that you have today. Anyone heard about this? These types of discoveries are happening all the time. So let's move on to our discussion. And I've got a proposition for you. Those who buried Jesus in a tomb, and buried's in quotes there because we know, when we think of burial in our culture, we go out to a field and we dig down 6 feet and we stick someone under the dirt, all right? But here the reference to buried means that you're going to put them in the earth, but you're going to put them in an entombed cavern, if you will. But those who put Jesus in that tomb knew that he would only be there temporarily. They knew he was only going to be there temporarily. Well, how do we know that? How can we say that that was a clear proposition? Well, is it because of all the witnesses who heard Jesus predict his own resurrection? Is that why we knew that they could just put him in the tomb for a few days and, hey, he said he was going to raise from the dead. Let's watch this. All right? Well, there's a healthy amount of skepticism in this crowd. I can pick it up right now. That a person who says, hey, I'm going to die and I'll see you 3 days later, we just say, no. We need to take you to the doctor. People don't talk like that. But if you look through the testimony of the Gospels, and here's the key references where Jesus actually said that I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to rise again from the dead. Here's the multiple references where Jesus predicted that he was going to do that very thing. In fact, those who did not like Jesus, and specifically the Pharisees of the time and the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, they go to Pontius Pilate and they say, we remember how that impostor, speaking of Jesus, said that while he was still alive, after 3 days I will rise. They knew it. Everyone heard it. And so it was their project to make sure that thing didn't happen, that someone didn't mess around with the tomb. So there they put the guards, there they put the seal. They're going to make sure that a further impostor event doesn't take place. Of course, we all saw that the disciples were running there to take on the guards to take the body out of there, right? For who knows whatever purpose that would be. Well, No, my proposition doesn't go in that direction. My proposition says those who buried Jesus in the tomb knew that he would only be there temporary for this Bible reference and other Bible references. John 19:40 says, they took, therefore, the body of Jesus and bound it with linen cloths, with spices, and here's the big phrase, according as it was the custom of the Jews to prepare for burial. So here we have the Gospel of John, and this was written in the Young's literal translation to really parse out everything that's in this particular passage, was to say that there was a custom of the Jews, that they would prepare bodies for burial. Well, all of us, all cultures do that, but here's the Gospel of John written worldwide. You know, John's being in Ephesus at this time, right? And he's telling people what life was like in Jerusalem at this time. And he says that the people who got Jesus' body, they did something according to a custom that the Jews observed, customs that probably aren't observed where we live or where you live. And I guarantee you right now, no one is performing this custom anymore that I know of. I think it should come back. We're not done with telling you what that custom is yet. So when I grew up in the church, and I was a church kid, and I was actually the problem church kid, I had to have Sunday school teachers go up to my mom and dad and say, hey, can you do something with your son? He's impossible. Well, I always grew up in church, and I heard the story about Jesus rising from the dead, coming out of the tomb. And I always heard the story about Joseph of Arimathea. I thought, man, that guy was pretty cool. I mean, to build a tomb in the side of a hill, I mean, I imagine that takes some bling. And he just gave it away to a guy. Just said, okay, I'll just let my grave go to you, and I'll just go build another one. And I'm a Dutch guy, and I'd say, man, that's crazy, spend that much money and give it to someone else. And but wow, thankfully Jesus rose from the dead, and he got his tomb back. Praise the Lord. But Joseph of Arimathea knew a little bit more than just the resurrection of Jesus. And so that's why we're talking about Second Temple Jewish burial practices. So here we've got a contemporary scene. This is the Mount of Olives across from the Kidron Valley, opposite what we would call the Temple Mount. Of course, that's going to always be in quotes these days because people like to argue about that. And this is the way Jewish people are buried today. You're buried kind of in an above-ground sarcophagus, a big giant limestone box. Your body's placed in there, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of graves of devout Jewish people who want to be over the holy city of Jerusalem and somehow be facing it. And for some religious reason, they want to be near the holy city. You can't be buried in the holy city because that would desecrate the holy city. But you want to be near it. All right? It's kind of an interesting thing because, a lot of promises are expressed in the Old Testament about what's supposed to happen in Zion, and all these dead people want to be near where all those promises are going to take place. So, now let's look specifically at if we can start to develop maybe an idea about this Jewish burial custom. So we're going to look at the three main discussions from the Gospels about Jesus' burial. So from Matthew 27, when it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there sitting opposite the tomb. So they knew exactly where Jesus had been placed. Well, let's look at Luke 23. It's going to sound very similar. Now, there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town, that's an interesting reference there, of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action, and he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in a linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb cut in stone where no one had ever yet been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The woman who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments on the Sabbath day, and then they rested. says the passage. And then finally, John chapter 19. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with spices, as it was the burial custom of the Jews. We read that earlier. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was close at hand, that's where they buried Jesus. So did you see something that was referenced clearly in all three accounts? Apart from Joseph of Arimathea, it's this linen shroud. It's something that they're wrapping the body of Jesus in. And then you get the reinforcement that there's coming aloes, myrrh, fragrances, ointments to anoint the body. All right, so here we're starting to develop a picture related to the custom of the Jews. Now, there's other burials that take place in the Bible, but we really don't get a hard and fast understanding of what we're talking about yet. Matthew 14 is the discussion of John the Baptist. He loses his head to Herod Antipas. Then his disciples came and took away the body and buried it. Not much information there. Matthew 26:12, Jesus is in Bethany, and this woman breaks a canister of fragrant ointment, and she pours it over Jesus. And he says, for in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. So here we're hearing something about preparations take place. You got to take the body, you got to do something with it. Now Jesus specifically alludes to, this is what we do to people who die. We anoint their bodies with oil, with fragrances. Luke 16:2, there's a parable, I'll put that in quotes too, that Jesus speaks about a rich man and Lazarus. And really interestingly, you can see how Jesus has affection for the beggar, because he dies and he was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. There's no discussion of his intermediary state. He is graciously taken to Abraham. It's a little interesting reference. And then the rich man also died and was buried. All right? Not much information there. Acts 5:6, there's a man named Ananias. He has a wife named Sapphira. Basically, we learn here that there's just some gifts that will cost the church too much. And he dies, and then the young men arose and wrapped him. Okay, now I'm finding something that sounds familiar. They wrapped him, and they carried him out, and they buried him. All right, so, reading the scriptures, this is not going to leap out at you where I'm going. There's just some hints, something subtle. And then there's another aspect of where I'm taking you tonight. Acts 13:36. Here we've got Paul preaching in a synagogue, and he says, for David, after he had served the purpose of God and his own generation fell asleep, a euphemism for dying, and was laid among his fathers and underwent decay. And so now we think, okay, how do you lay someone with their fathers, and how do you undergo decay? We bury people on the ground, and we don't plan to see them again. These people are laid with someone they know in some kind of setting where their body can desiccate. Okay, that's kind of an Old Testament-y thing. That's interesting. And then 2 Samuel has another interesting discussion about King David. He goes to Beit Shan, where I showed you that picture, and he brought the bones of Saul, the bones of Jonathan, his son, from there, and they gathered the bones of those who had been hanged. They were hanging on the wall. They just posted their dead bodies to the wall to make a statement. They buried the bones of Saul and Jonathan, his son, in the country of Benjamin, in Zelah, in the grave of Kish, his father. All right, so here they're taking the man's bones. He's on the wall, but he hasn't rotted to the point of completely his flesh disappearing, but there's a point where they take his bones and they're going to gather them to their fathers, and his father comes from a particular region, so the bones have to go from the place where his father is from. All right, that's kind of an interesting thing that's going to come into useful understanding as we go forward. So here we've got this Hebrew practice that develops in the Old Testament, lekut asomot, where you gather bones and you bring them back to your family and you dwell with your family. There's a whole wonderful theological concept that there is going to be a day of gathering for the Lord. That Jesus Christ, as the Messiah, he is going to gather all the exiles and he's going to bring them to the promised land, and he will be the anointed king. And where there is a gathering, there is always a division. All right? But the gathering process is important, and so the Jewish people in the Old Testament are working out their theology by understanding this great day where you will, like Psalm 1 says, be in the assembly of the righteous, but not so the wicked. You know, they are scattered like chaff. But the righteous people, they will be gathered together to a place where God will be their deliverer. So a gathering concept is important, and being gathered to your family, being gathered to your fathers, is an important aspect of their theological commitment. All right, so now we're going to look very specifically at Second Temple Jewish second burial practices. And so I made a little diagram here, if you could watch the bouncing ball and sing with me. Okay, how did this process take place? All right, well, so what I have here is a cave, and this is a top-down view. And there's, of course, your famous rolling rock, and it didn't have to be a rolling rock, it just had to be a big rock that would seal the entrance to the cave. And then there would be little settings where you would lay the dearly departed. After you anointed their bodies and placed them in the wrapping, you would anoint their bodies, and because there's going to be an associated stench with a dead body, and you want them to be a more pleasant aroma. That's just sort of the practice, all right? And then you leave, and you have 1 year to mourn for the dead. And when 1 year is up, you come back to that very location, you roll back the stone, and you see that their body has desiccated. It's turned to bone. Everything has been eaten up. Even the cloth has done a really interesting job of disappearing because of what happens in that tomb in a year in a Mediterranean climate. All right? It's interesting. I've read that some skulls have been found that saw the linen marks impressed on the bone of the remains of these people. Anyways, after you get them, you collect all their bones, you gather their bones, and then you put them into a bone box, what is called the ossuary. And you stick them in the ossuary, and because we're at a top-down view, you can't see it from here, but then you would slide the ossuary into a little burial niche. And you would do this over and over again for your entire family, so that in some of these ossuaries, you'd have several people that belong to this family, and you'd gather the bones of your family. So here's some other scenes. Here's my trip to Israel with some of my classmates. This is outside the Jaffa Gate on, interestingly enough, the west side of Jerusalem. We'll talk about that. But here you can see, and it had rained, so here you can see an outline of a puddle of where you would have laid the dead person and where they would have decayed over time. And then you'd make your entrance into this place, and then you'd grab their bones later, a year later, and you'd stick them in the box, and you'd slide the box into a burial niche. Here's a cave that has been found. So many of these caves get found by accident. Israel's doing a lot of building, and suddenly a truck tire goes through a hole, and we got to shut this whole thing down because the Israeli Antiquities Authority is taking over. All right? Well, here's the bone boxes. Here's the burial niche. This is where you'd take the bodies and you'd slide them in, and you'd keep using it. So Joseph of Arimathea knew he was getting his tomb back, because Jesus, like everybody else, he just would have rotted there for a year. Someone would have come back, grabbed his bones, and probably taken them back to Nazareth, where his family's from, or Bethlehem, because he had to be buried with his fathers. Interesting. idea? Well, here's how you packed the bones in the burial box. The longer bones go down at the bottom, and then the skull is put to the top. Very interestingly, they always find some coins inside those skulls because they would put coins on top of their eyes when they would lay them in the area. And so interestingly, because so many of these have been looted, sort of like the Egyptian mummies were looted, but we found some, and we've got coins from the direct time of this area. All of the prefects, including Pontius Pilate, produced coins when they were in power to show the people, I'm in power here. And you're going to hold coins with my idolatrous symbols, and you're going to deal with it. Well, Valerius Gratius, who was the prefect before Pontius Pilate, we found his coins inside of the skulls of some of these people. All right, of course, my femur is my longest bone. Even though I broke it when I was a freshman in high school, my box is going to be long. All right. Now, if you came from a family of means, of course, someone would die, then you'd say, I got to go get my bone box. I got a year to get my bone box. And you'd go to an artisan, and if you could afford it, they would decorate the side of the bone box. And then when you'd get the body, you'd write your relative's name on the side. All right? Everyone could read that right there? All right? Do you think that's Greek? That's some form of Aramaic right here. All right? And we've got people speaking a lot of different languages at this time, but here we have someone with an Aramaic notation. Again, from the other side, you would lay the body in a place like this. The body would rot, stick it in the bone box, slide it in the hole. All right? Here's a demonstration from Zondervan that I saw, and I didn't know that they would be so mafia with the dead body, but you see the stone, you step down into an area of preparation, you lay the body here. After they desiccate, you put them in the bone box, then the bone box goes into the niche. Does everybody understand that? And then you do that over and over again for all your... But we've all heard about this at Sunday school, right? No, we did not. Well, I can't wait to write the literature and to have children coming out of Sunday school saying, look, Mom, Dad, I built a bone box. Someone's got to do it. All right, and of course there's, again, theological ideas. The way that people lived is the way they died. So, here's a pattern for these burial caves that would look like, sort of like the temple as you're coming further and further to the Holy of Holies. All right? When the Jewish people would have children and they'd grow up and get married, their kids would come back and their families would live around a main atrium part of their house. And so that son would live there and the other son with his daughter. And they lived and they died in similar patterns, right? And so in my father's house, there are many chambers. Okay, I'm just messing with you with that one. All right. So to make it clear, and so it's not just my words. Here's a nice little synopsis of where we've come. An ossuary is a stone bone box used for secondary burials. Initially, the body is laid to rest in a burial niche or on that platform. After decomposition, the bones were collected and placed in an ossuary, making the burial niche available for subsequent burial. Tombs belonged to families, so subsequent burials were normal. So here's more necropolises or ossuologiums that they found in all kinds of places. All right. All around Jerusalem, Jericho, Beit Sharim, even Bethany has these caves for people to be buried in. And of course, here's your Indiana Jones warehouse of ossuaries. They have so many ossuaries now that they don't keep them anymore. It has to be hugely significant now. It has to be completely and ornately carved, or it must have someone's name etched inside or on the outside of it of some kind of import or significance. They have so many of them now that we're not collecting anymore. They're still precious and important. It's still history, but they've got over 1,000 of them now. And we get the point. This is what they did, right? So, from one source here, most tombs have already been visited or looted in antiquity or in recent times, leaving the record of their original contents incomplete. And that's a very important aspect of archaeology. What you find has to be in situ. It has to be in the place. And if you find something and you take it somewhere else, you've ruined it. Because you've got to study every part of where that item is to determine its authenticity, the practices of the people, on and on. Not all ossuaries are saved during excavations so as to be stored and registered. Oftentimes only ossuaries with inscriptions, decorations, or both are kept. A catalog of Jewish ossuaries states, now this is 5 years ago. I did this presentation 5 years ago, so I'm not sure what the number is now. Okay. States that 917 ossuaries in the collection of the state of Israel, only 231 are inscribed with names. The East Talpiot tomb is unusual that 6 of its 9 registered ossuaries were actually inscribed with names. Guys, we're going to have to spend a little time with this. Be ready. Talpiot, nice community south of Jerusalem. 9. Okay, those are all Easter eggs. Here's the list and the frequencies of names on these ossuaries. You can see that our favorite name right here is Shimon, Simon, or Salome. That's a very popular child's name in that year. Over and over, you can see how popular a form of Mary was. Yosef, Judah, Eleazar, Lazarus, Yehoazar, Yohanan. Okay? You can see that these were the most popular names. Yeshua, a very popular name. Out of 200, how many did I say earlier? Excuse me. 231, yeah. So here we can see a list of names and what people's names were. But we've got a lot of different names on the rest of them. We'll find out about them. So, okay, again, you can see how these boxes were decorated. You see a box decorated like this, you say that probably is a family of means that they would decorate. Now, we have to spend a little time talking about the decoration because super, super prevalent are 2 rosettas, only 2. And decorated a lot with plant-like material. I've gone to a website that I couldn't duplicate. I could show you 231 pictures of just plants. And so when someone puts something on the side of something, doesn't it beg for some type of interpretation? Well, why did they do this? Why the constant rosettas? And you'd find those rosettas on their pots, on their dishes, on the floors of their buildings. And so I've read a lot of material, and I think I have a pretty good idea why. Why 2? Now, first of all, when we all get married and we talk about the significance of the ring, what do we say? It is a circle, and a circle has no beginning or no, it's eternal. So there's something about eternity there. I think that works. But we know the Jews also have some pretty high standards for what they can depict in their artwork. They don't want to break any second commandments or any commandments, right? They don't want to verge on the form of idolatry in any way. So the making of plants seems to be okay for them. And so a lot of this are leaf structures of all the different types of plants that grow in Israel. And some people have said, well, eternal, and man, those sometimes look to me like the wings of an angel. They're carrying me. Or maybe that's Ezekiel's wheel inside of a wheel. But I'm going to tell you, I think what it is, I think it's like you looking up and looking at a palm tree. And what you're seeing are 2 of them. And there are 2 significant trees that we learn about in the Bible. And we read even in Jewish literature, particularly the book of Enoch, that the throne of God is in a garden. It's in a forest, and it's in between the trees. And these people are thinking about something in the afterlife. They are thinking about something in the afterlife, that they're going to be in a location where they're going to be in the presence of God. And we're going to build on that a little bit, all right? And we're going to show you something that bucks the code here. But so prevalent. How about this baby? Now, I've never seen this one, and I couldn't get to find any information on this one. There's circles, but you know what this is? This is some depiction that is determined to be a portrayal of the temple. And here we've got, the two pillars outside. What were the names of those pillars? You guys remember the names of the pillars that are outside the temple? And capitals, and here's the capitals on top of columns. We have got some of these capitals from Solomon's portico that have been identified as come from that temple structure. So someone right here had a lot of means, and they went in a completely different direction. All right, but you still see the plant life. All right. A couple years ago, Jewish police officers are finding someone to be suspicious, and they pull over his car. He's got 11 ossuaries in his car. He's on his way to Tel Aviv to sell them to somebody. He's looted them from some location, and he's trying to make a buck. So these things are everywhere. It tells you how many people died from 135 BC to 70 AD. All right, so why did they have to do this practice? Was it because Jerusalem was just getting so large and they're run out of space? In California, cemeteries aren't going to work anymore because they're now making, what do they call those things, mausoleums? We don't have enough space to put all those people. Is that what's happening? The old city of Jerusalem today, 40,000 people live in what's called the old city of Jerusalem. And I think that's amazing because it's not a very big place. But the estimates about the time of Jesus, about 80,000 people lived around Jerusalem. And imagine to what it swelled to when it was pilgrimage time. Joseph of Arimathea says it went up to the millions of people came into Jerusalem. All right? But was it because they were running out of space? Maybe. Was it because they really wanted to emphasize the Old Testament gathering passages? Yeah, it works. Was it because they wanted people to really identify with their family heritage? Not that it was ancestor worship or anything, but hey, you're Jewish and this is the way we do it, and we're a different type of people. That's also been conjectured. Of course, you know that someone being in the tomb for a year ends your time of mourning. But most people, and I tend to agree with them, see this as a purification and a sanctification practice. When your body's flesh dissolves, you've now been purified. That which was offensive to God is gone, and you have now been purged. Your flesh now reveals the whiteness of your body. And there are rabbinic literatures about how sons should rejoice on the day that they grab the bones of their parents and put them in the bone box, because now they are freed, and now they are in a place where they enjoy God's presence, now purified before him. Really interesting. Of course, they're buried in limestone boxes. All right, so ritual purity is important. You can't be buried in something made of clay. Of course, limestone, Cinnamanian limestone, is a sedimentary rock, but it is prominent throughout Israel. They found a location outside of Cana of Galilee where that famous wedding took place, where Jesus but changed the water into wine. They found a site where they were constructing and carving vessels for rituals. And because it was out of limestone, it was considered pure. You couldn't use clay it had to be something that was pure, something holy like glass, something purified. All right, and so they put them in limestone boxes. And there's this very interesting reference to the Holy One in Psalm 16, not seeing decay. You're expecting everyone to decay, but that God would keep someone from not decaying. And what if you came back after a year and the body was completely there and it didn't decay? that person would be a holy one, which is a little problematic. But anyway, there is, I think, more of a theological reason for why they're doing this than practicality. All right? It's really not practical to do what they're doing. When someone dies, they're to immediately be buried. A dead body was never left alone. Someone always had to be with it. There would be a linen shroud and a face covering. That face covering has a lot of discussions. My personal opinion is that it was actually wrapped around the top of the head and kept your jaw closed. That's my perspective on it. Coins were placed over the eyes. We referenced that. And then the whole body was saturated with perfumes. All that linen was saturated so that you would not smell so reprehensible. Remember when in John 11, Jesus comes to where Lazarus had passed away, and he says, yeah, roll back that stone, and the famous line from the King James and from the Young's Literal, they say, Lord, but he stinketh. It's been 4 days. And then he comes out, and what happens? What does the passage say? He is wrapped up, and Jesus says, loosen. So you can see that they had performed the practice to prepare him for a second burial. All right. So here we are looking at a resurrection scene, and I had always thought that, it always had just been about a tomb, and Jesus had come out of a grave, and the empty tomb apologetic is huge in Christianity. It is very important, and we have all kinds of discussions about how that tomb was the one that Jesus was in, and he didn't swoon, and he didn't get better, and he didn't fight off the Romans, and the women didn't go to the wrong tomb, and it wasn't a twin of his that died, on and on and on, that you have to get rid of the empty tomb. But more than that, you got to deal with there's no box. But we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so I remember being with high school students. They're very creative, and I said, please give me a naturalistic explanation for how Jesus could have circumnavigated all of those details and gotten out of that tomb. And my high school student said, yeah, a bear came in, scared the guards, rolled away the tomb, ate the body of Jesus, and left. And then one of the wise students said, yes, and before the bear left, he folded the face covering and he put it on the... So this is the story of Christianity, and there's been no one able to defeat all of the aspects of this, and the testimony of this is important. But now there's a second level of it. Not only is there an empty tomb, there's no box. And that's why I say Jesus is born out of the box. Now, we're going to take a little time and look at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All of biblical archaeological review, almost everyone says this is it. This is where Jesus was buried. All right? So I've been to this location. You remember these two domes here. This is how you enter into it. It's not very ornate or important, but there's always tons of tourists in there. And if you look at this map of Jerusalem, here would have been the old walls of Jerusalem, and Jesus, according to this theory, is crucified and buried right in the acreage of that location because it was outside the walls at that time. Old town Jerusalem today extends to here. Temple Mount, City of David, Hasmonean district, Essene district, Herod's palace. Pilate probably tried Jesus here. The Via Dolorosa probably didn't happen. Had to probably go out the Jaffa Gate and kind of go out here. What's really interesting is that the references to the crucifixion are people are passing by and wagging their tongues at him, and there's no real road right here, so that's a little interesting. But he says the theory and all the tradition, this is where it happens. And to give you a little bit of a primer on a problem with that, is that this is Jerusalem, what I just showed you on the map, and this is where all the tombs are. Nothing is on the west side except for the tomb of Herod's family, those Gentiles. There was a purity conviction. The prevailing winds blow this way, and you don't put dead bodies over here because it would blow over the city of Jerusalem. Here's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where I'd showed you before. There's just nothing around here. This, for me, was the place I think that I was with my classmates. but everything is over here on this other side. So that's a real problem for the theory of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And of course, remember those two domes. The theory is that Jesus died on the cross at this part of the area. And you can go there and you can see Golgotha, according to them. It's under glass. You can't chip it away like Plymouth Rock. And then his body was prepared right here on a slab. And people go in there and they kiss the slab. I don't know about that. And then a little bit further away, that's where he was buried. And see, you can see the former relief of the area outside the walls. And they built this giant structure here because was it Constantine's mom was told this is where it is. And National Geographic did a big special on it, and they just went in there and they redid everything. And here's the thing. There is a burial niche in this location. And so people say people were probably buried here. This could have been where Joseph of Arimathea had his grave. And it was close by from the crucifixion, and it was in a garden-like setting. It's just not very much, it's not very far from each other. And it's on the wrong part of the property. Interesting, isn't it? All right, here's just an above view. Here's Golgotha. You walk, how many steps is that? 20, 25? Here's where they think he was prepared for burial. You usually prepared them inside, because that's where you had to put all the ointments. You didn't want to carry a sopping body with you. All right? And then you walk another 25 feet, another 25 feet, you know. That's pretty close from there to there. But it could have happened. But there are other theories. I've got a good friend named Shane Rosenthal. He's with White Horse Inn. He's written some pretty compelling articles to rebut this. And I'm reading them, and I'm trying to follow him. And I'm trying to use all the information that I know that's always been out there. And there's something going on. All right. They've got a structure over the place where Jesus supposedly had his tomb. All right. Now, this is where everyone else is buried, on the Mount of Olives, on the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem. And that's evident even today. So here we go again. This is the story of Jesus raising from the dead. This is so important to Christianity, is it not? And you'd think that everyone had known that Christianity teaches this. Although one time in Orange County, California, as a youth pastor, we had a kid come to the youth group, and it was around Easter time, and I said, we all know that Jesus rose from the dead, and he came afterwards to me and said, I never heard that before. I said, wait a minute, you're 14 years old, you live in Orange County, California, you're a pretty well-educated populace here, we've got some mega churches here. You've never heard Jesus rose from the dead? No. Well, that's why we got to keep proclaiming it, number one. And then, of course, that's the source of all of our hope and righteousness is in this, Jesus rising for our justification. But you destroy this narrative, you have a way of toppling all of Christianity. Some people out there know that. This is a famous person named James Cameron. He's written a lot of movies. And something happened at Tel Peo, about 3 miles south of Jerusalem. They stumbled across another burial cave. Didn't know it was there. It was under an apartment. They were installing something. Famous story, truck hits something, opens a hole. Whoa, what's down there? Well, James Cameron gets involved with Simcha Jakobovich, who's called the Naked Archaeologist. And I don't know Charles Pellegrino very much, but James Tabor was also super involved in this. And they decided that from the boxes they had found, the bone boxes, that this was actually Jesus's plot. This was his family tomb. Because on the side of these ossuaries were names that were associated with his inner circle. All right, so 1980, they published in 1994, there's a box that says Yeshua Bar Yosef. Oh yeah, this is Jesus, the son of Joseph. There's Maria, Yossi, Yehuda Bar Yeshua. Oh, Jesus has a son. His name is Judas. And then there's Merimene Emara, and that's Jesus' wife. And they put all these conjectures together, and they go for a full-scale movie, special, Discovery Channel, books, everything goes crazy. All right? And they say they've been able to find bones in these locations and that the DNA made sure that they weren't family members, so they must have been married. And Cameron produces this episode in 2007. All right, well I tell you, this has sucked the air out of archaeology for ever since this has happened. All right, now they only found 9 boxes there, but they were making the case that there were 10. I'll tell you why. All right, so here's your typical box found in all of these burial chambers, and typical rosettas, some interesting leaf-like structures. And on the side of this has the name of Yeshua and the things that we discussed. Well, there was a conference that was held, and all of these people who were pretty prominent with pretty prominent universities and colleges came out and said, we're calling bunk. We're calling bunk on your whole theory. You are doing things without peer review. You just rushed to publish, and you wanted to make a spectacle. And even as we examine this more and more, we have serious problems with your scholarship and the things that you claim. And right now, the prevailing scholarship says what they have been pushing is not the case. Well, you can trust the naked archaeologists, or you can trust, it's all about faith, right? All right, so, but here are some significantly important ossuaries we found. This one was found in a cave, and on the side of this, can you tell if this is a wealthy family or not? Yeah, it looks good. See the 2 rosettas? He's got rosettas in rosettas. I'd like to see that thing turn. All right. Well, this particular ossuary belongs to a man named Caiaphas. A most intricately carved ossuary was decorated with 2 circles, each containing 5 rosettas, and twice carved into an undecorated side appeared the name Yosef Bar Kapha, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. The ossuary contained the remains of 6 people, 2 infants, a child aged 2 to 5, a boy aged 13 to 18, an adult female, and a man about 60 years old. The latter are believed to be the bones of Caiaphas, before whom Jesus was brought for questioning. Do you ever think that we'd have the bones of someone mentioned in the Bible? Now, can we prove that 100% that this is the case? No, it's hard to prove 100% almost anything. But if you wanted to put money on this being the bones of Caiaphas, you'd probably get a good return on the gamble. All right? Because there's more information about this. I know it's coming up, but I'm just going to pop it right now. We know him as Caiaphas, but his name is Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Did you know that? He's called Caiaphas throughout the Bible, but his real name is Joseph, son of Caiaphas. And so that's why it says Joseph, son of Caiaphas, because that's who Caiaphas is in our New Testament. He goes by the name Caiaphas, not Joseph, son of. All right. Then we found this other box. This one has also sucked the air out of the universe. This one is very plain. Rich family? Probably not. All right, but then there was an inscription on the side. And what did the inscription say? It's getting clearer, right? You guys see? You guys see who it says? Oh, this is what it says. Yaakov, son of Yosef, Akui of Yesu. This is supposed to say James, the brother, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. This got brought to the fore. Problem was they didn't know where it came from. So the Jewish Antiquities Authority had a trial, and it went on for years to say, is this really true? And epigraphers would say, wait a minute, it slopes too much, and this doesn't match with this, and who uses this word for brother? People in Galilee do. But anyways, it's been fought, contested. It's been determined to be a forgery, but no one paid any penalties for it. It's a very weird thing. All right, if it's a forgery, why don't you bring some punishments against the forger? No, we're just going to call it even Stevens. We're going to say it's not real, but it's out there. All right. So James Cameron said, that box belongs in my cave. They found 9 boxes, but I say that box belongs in my cave to prove that was Jesus' real family. because his brother should have been there, and we didn't find it in there because someone had taken it out of a cave that had never been known before, but somehow it got out, and it just gets really convoluted when you want to try to force a narrative, right? So, anyways, you would see that people like to take objects and get notoriety or acclaim from them. Here, I just got page after page because this went on forever. This started in 2002. And recently was determined to be a forgery, but we're not going to do anything about it. There was photos of it made in 1976. The patina seemed to be consistent, all kinds of things, but they still didn't like it. It's considered a problem. So here's this interesting debate. An acquittal would embarrass the Israel Antiquities Authority's investigators who accused the co-defendants of being in an international chain of forgers, planting sophisticated fakes in the world's museums, and Tel Aviv University, who defend their scientific tests proving the item is a fake. A guilty verdict would destroy the reputation of one of the world's leading collectors of biblical antiquities and drive the entire Israeli market underground. The IAA wants to shut down the trade of Bible-era artifacts, which they believe encourage grave robbers who transfer the choicest finds out of the country to private collectors. So that's why they had to just say we're just going to let it go, because there's too many things in play. We don't need guys driving out of the country with 11 ossuaries. We should be finding them where they're supposed to be. And politics. All right. So anyways, the whole idea of the Jesus tomb at Tel Piot has been determined to be a rabbit's chase, and it does not meet the muster of scholarly investigation. Here's some other ossuaries of import. Here's one that says Simon, the builder of the temple. Is that Greek? No, that's some form of Aramaic. Chel lechel, the temple. All right, here's some family that wanted to commemorate Dad who helped build the temple. So out of the thousands and thousands of men who built the temple for Herod the Great, good old Simon here, he's remembered as one of those guys who put in the time on the temple. Here's one as Yehonan ben Hakol. Well, that's not a very important ossuary. Why would you keep that? Well, you open it up and you find the bones and you see, wait a minute, that guy's got a Roman spike through his ankle. This guy's been crucified. And the family couldn't get the bone out of his ankle, and they put it in this ossuary. And so now we have another evidence of the people, places, and practices of the New Testament, that the Romans actually did crucify people with nails and put them through their bones so they could keep them on the crosses that they placed the people on. Here's a very interesting location, Dominus Flevit Church. Dominus means the Lord cried. This is the traditional spot where Jesus entered Jerusalem and cried over Jerusalem. He wanted to gather them like chicks, but they would not come. And here's the view over Jerusalem from Dominus Flevit. All right, that's the Temple Mount. And here, way back in 1873, can you believe I'm going there? 1873, a French archaeologist goes into a cave. He discovers near this location ossuaries that contain the name Eleazar, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. These names were followed by the sign of the cross. Something's really interesting going on near Bethany and Bethphage. We're finding caves with Christian iconography. Crosses, X's, fishes, and the name of Jesus on these ossuaries. Well, in 1873, and this guy is the real deal. This is the guy who found the placard that said, if you're not Jewish and you come beyond this gate, you're forfeiting your life to come into these Jewish courts. This guy's real. But this information here has not been really touted and seen as significant, and it's only now being re-earthed and rediscovered because ossuaries are so big and important now. Here's supposed to be an early photograph of an ossuary near the Dominus Flavit. Well, one of the boxes in this location, found some years later, has something written on the side of the box. Can you see what it says right there? It says, is that Greek? No, some kind of Aramaic. It says, Simon Bar Jonah. Anyone ever heard of Simon Bar Jonah? Yeah, that's the guy Jesus later calls Peter. All right? And now, come on. James Cameron's got a tomb with a lot of references with the most popularly named people. Of course, Simon is popular too. But the phrase Simon Bar Jonah, do we really have a box with his name? And do we really have his bones? What's really interesting is the people who worked on this are two Franciscan Roman Catholics. And they know what the dominant teaching of the church is, that Peter's bones are in Rome. And they say, no, don't believe it. These are Peter's bones. This is where Peter really is from. This is where he would have been buried, along with all the faithful people who were longing for the Messiah. Well, we're not hearing about this. Well, it's starting to come back. It's starting to percolate and bubble back up because all this stuff was documented by archaeologists and they did their stuff. You're going to be learning more about this. It might take another 20 years, like the stuff they found in the 60s that's now only come to earth right now, but it's coming. This is stuff that they have, that they still possess. Okay, here's another famous ossuary. The guy started and said, oh, that's not what I wanted to write. And then he wrote, Alexander. Is that Greek? That is Greek. Alexander, son of Simon. And in the Bible, there's a man named Simon of Cyrene who is pressed into service to carry the cross for Jesus. And the Bible says he's got two sons, Alexander and Rufus. And people are like, how do you get that close with these names? These are people in the Bible. And here's an ossuary with someone's name, two people listed in the Bible in relationship to one another. Can you say 100% that's who it is? No, but you're on a trail that's taking you somewhere. All right? Here's another one. Yehochana, daughter, Bat Yochachan, son of Theophilus, the high priest. Well, that's an interesting reference. Of course, look at the plant life. What are those? Palm trees. What does Psalm 92 say about the righteous? They're like palm trees. All right? Well, let's look a little bit closer here. The guy started and said, okay, I'm going to start again. And then he did it again. And he wrote the name, that this is the daughter of the high priest Theophilus. Do we know a high priest named Theophilus? Do we know someone in the Bible named Theophilus? Right? Yeah. There's 2 books written to him. Luke and Acts. Well, let's discover who this guy is. Let's look at some family trees here. There's a very famous man named Annas, or Ananias. He's called the high priest in the Bible. He's the high priest. All right? But the prefect, before Pontius Pilate, Valerius Gratius, deposed him because Annas had the penchant for killing people without trials. And so he deposed him, and he made someone else the high priest. First, it was his son Eleazar. We call him Lazarus, perhaps. But then someone else takes on that position for a long time. And his name is Joseph, son of Caiaphas, who is the son-in-law of Annas. And he's friends with the Romans. This guy is your high priest. By Roman standards, high priests don't stop being high priests till they die. And so every time Annas is referenced in the New Testament, he's the high priest. But Caiaphas is also called the high priest because he's the Roman high priest. Well, he's got brothers. Oh my goodness, he's got a brother named Theophilus. All right, these guys are brother-in-law. This is the son of Annas. And then he's got 2 sons, Matthias, that's a pretty cool name. And then Yehohanan, and he has a daughter named Yehochana. And this is the theory. I'm not advocating it. I'm just telling you what it is. That Luke 8:3 talks about a Joanna, who's the wife of Chuza, who was Herod's steward, who was a supporter of the ministry of Jesus. And in Luke 24, when they go to the empty tomb, Joanna is among the people that go to that tomb. And then some people really want to press that and say that Romans 16, and a reference to Junius, someone who was an apostle before Paul, that's who that is. Now, I'm not advocating it. I'm just telling you what's out there so you can know about some of the discussion that's going on. But again, people who are listed in history, in the scriptures, they are being found, or their names are being found on bone boxes. All right. Once again, there's been some strange theory out there that Christianity is only a Greek religion. It didn't come out of Judaism. And all the inscriptions are in Greek. And I've showed you quite a few that are not in Greek. All right. So here's another one on another bone box. This is what it says. This is ancient Hebrew. This is how you would read it in today's paper. All right. It's fuzzy because I had to blow it up big. But this is Hebrew. A lot of people had Hebrew written on their historical documents. Here's another person, not Greek. Shalom Zion, Bat Simon the Cohen. All right, some form of Aramaic. Okay, we're starting to wrap up now. We talked about these rosettas. We see a lot of these. What is that? That is some kind of a perfume bottle. All right, you see the lid there and where you would keep the ointment. This is what you would take to anoint the body and to demonstrate that you've anointed them and that you want them to be fragrant, offering to the Lord, be a living sacrifice. You would pour it all upon them. You'd finish the rites and you'd be a drink offering to the Lord. All right? But then we have a few that kind of go differently. Rosetta's still, but another idea that perhaps this is a temple, a view of the temple. Or maybe this is the You Are Here map of the Oscillogium. Not sure yet. Then we come to this one, and we're going to be wrapping it up with this one. It's like, where does this come from? This doesn't match anything. I could get plants out of this, but this is interesting interspersed design. And what is that? And then Simca Jagabufici and James Tabor said, this is a resurrection scene. This is a Christian ossuary. This is Jonah coming out of a whale as a symbol for the resurrection and how Christians believe in the resurrection. I don't buy it. All right? Really, I think I would prefer to see that this is not Jonah coming out of a big fish. All right? But that is, in fact, the kind of vessels that were used at this time to carry fragrant ointments. Listen, you know how these things were transported? In a UPS truck? No. These things were hauled on animals, and you didn't just hold things flat on anything. They were tied and affixed to things so they could bob, and then when you finally went to use it, you'd break it open. You'd pour it. And here we have people being poured, anointed at their death as some way of being sanctified to God in a religious way, almost a baptism of death. All right. So here we come to some final statements. How do we interpret this passage? And Jesus cried out again, and with a loud voice, and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. Here's Jesus on the cross, cries out. What if he is actually crucified on the east side of Jerusalem, where all the sacrifices would take place of removing sin from the camp? It would be properly on the eastern portion, like on Mount Olives. And Jesus was actually crucified opposite the temple. And as he's crying out, he can see that curtain split. I just think of that in a kind of a dramatic way. But what if that's really the relationship? He is the sin sacrifice outside the camp. And then it says in verse 52, the tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Now, I read that verse a bunch of times without the knowledge of second burials, and I thought, how does that happen? How do people come out of their graves? Well, you know who came out of their graves? These were the people who had just been wrapped up, who were waiting for the body to decay. They had not been put in the bone box yet, and they were brought back to life as a demonstration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that the judgment that God was rendering was going to be redemption and eternal life for those who would trust in him. So these weren't people who were long dead, and all of a sudden, how come Uncle Joe from 15 years ago is walking around? These were people who had recently died, who had been prepared for burial, and they came out of their graves. It also helps us to interpret some other passages about a person who tells Jesus, hey, I want to bury my father first. I can't follow you right now. And Jesus would say, let the dead bury the dead. That's like a great heavy metal lyric. And you think, wow, Jesus, calm down. Be a little nice to the guy. The guy's dad's going to die. No, he's waiting for an entire year to go by before he's going to follow Jesus. I'm sorry, we don't wait that long. We're not going to wait that long. You're going to follow me now. If the fishermen can leave their nets, you can follow me right now. And of course, we read this famous line from Jesus in Matthew 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and uncleanliness. What translation is this? So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous. This is more of a context. Your Rosettas aren't going to work with me. So, in conclusion, in light of Jewish burial practices of this time, we know that a family member would return to the tomb to gather the bones of Jesus' body, to intern his bones in an ossuary, or at least Joseph of Arimathea would have come back to take back his tomb. But since Jesus' body was no longer in the tomb, none of these associated actions were required. That's why James Cameron, who doesn't want the resurrection to be true, doesn't want Christianity to be true, could invent a bone box, because he's got to do that. But he can't do that. And Jesus Christ has risen from the dead on the third day, as he predicted. And all those who put their trust in him have new life in him. Resurrection, hope, peace with God, assurance of God's love, joy in the Holy Spirit, peace of conscience. Amen. That's what I'm after. So that's where I'll end. Shall I pray for us all?
We have questions?
Do we have time for questions?
Yes, we will.
All right.
Now, you might have to take the mic off.
All right. Oh.
And, of course, the reason that we have to have the mic is for the online audience, which has been substantial tonight. One of the great things about everybody having to go online is that we're reaching newer and wider audiences than we ever would have otherwise. One of the reasons that we're doing this as the Memphis Apologetics group is because nobody's doing this in the Memphis area. Very little in the Arkansas area, very little in the Mississippi area. And at the same time, the shift in the culture has already taken place. What tends to happen is everybody forgets about apologetics and buries it and tries to get it out of the way so that they can do real ministry. At the same time, as the culture shifts and the weight and the pressure of the general society gets stronger and stronger against Christian faith and understanding, eventually you end up with the dominant positions in the universities and the culture at large being the anti-Christian position. Now, even in this place where I think for an entire generation, people have kind of thought, this is a Christianized area. Mm-hmm. People believe the Bible here. Mm-hmm. The churches are strong here. I think the situation is the churches are just well attended. Mm-hmm. But the younger people, especially in the universities, the tide has already turned. Mm-hmm. Now, it should have been that rigorous practices of Christian apologetics could have stemmed the decay in this specific Bible-centered area. But it didn't take place. So what we have now is a lot of Christians that don't know their faith and that can't defend it. And the younger people coming up, going into the universities and just getting their brains bashed in with rigorously detailed academic information that is set up against their faith. Now, the simple fact is, the Associate Reformed Presbyterian churches are better at some things than others. One of the things they're great at is rigorously detailed academic data and information. So we actually still have, in this theological tradition, the rigor and the firepower to fight back. You know, last month was our first time. This will be our second one. Already from the online audience, 6,700 times that lecture has been watched. And I expect this one to have more. And I expect the one next month to have more as it starts to build. All of this upon a huge budget for advertising that exceeded $100. But all of which was spent within about 15 miles of this church. So the fact that there are people that are out there that are willing to listen, that are looking for this kind of data and information in this area is just sheer fact. There's a groundswell happening, and we have to be able to answer it. Interestingly, a lot of the large churches that are very well funded are very willing to draw people in from outside of town to come in for a night, but they're not willing to hire staff or necessarily have pastors on staff that can do this type of thing. One of the things I love about Kent Moorlach is that he's a real pastor that can do this kind of thing. Now, you guys probably know and feel the same way I do. There are lots of people that could teach in a seminary that couldn't pastor a church, right? Historically, if you go back in the faith, you had to be able to do both. Now, one of the reasons that we can do this these days is that people can just lecture online and that type of thing. Well, in this crazy time of COVID, we've been forced to do both, right? We've been forced to get incredibly uncomfortable and not just do good teaching in the church, but it's all had to go online. And so we're reaching and touching many different people that heretofore we have not had to do. And they're answering us back. You know, I've probably fielded about 400 or 500 questions from the last set of lectures. And I expect the same thing to happen here. We were even getting questions online while Pastor Kent was lecturing, and probably had just about 100 people online watching. But how many people are going to watch this over the next month? I expect it to be thousands. One of the main questions is, haven't they found boxes with Jesus' name on it? So that can be one of the questions that you'll answer tonight. At the same time, we want to be able to share this with friends and family, and especially for people out there that are asking this kind of questions. There has been, I think one of the major things that I've seen in this area is this tendency to say, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. And that is wonderful. There is nothing purer than that kind of faith. That's actually the kind of faith I have. But more and more, with the people under 40, you're going to be running into the kind of faith of, but the university professor said this and this and this, so it's not settled for me. So being able to have the heft of the historical background, which actually corresponds to the writing and teachings of the Bible, that's the kind of information that we need to remember at this time. Previous generations in our specific lineage, going back to the Princeton line, like the Hodges and the Warfield, and all of these different teachers, they knew this kind of thing backward and forward, and they didn't even have the kind of data that we have available right now. But they were a neck deep in Christian apologetics because the times called for it. So, Pastor, if you wouldn't mind coming up, maybe we have a few questions for you. The first question will be, hey, James Cameron also said there's lots of boxes with Jesus' name on them. Haven't we found his bones by now?
No, not the bones of Jesus of Nazareth. Let's be clear. There are names that are very popular. Judah and Judas of infamy was named after a very famous Jewish warrior, Judas Maccabeus. And parents would name their children after important individuals. Joshua of the Old Testament was a very laudatory individual. And to name your son after Joshua, his name being Yeshua in the Greek, would be, hey, I want my son to grow up to be a man like that, who can bring people into the promised land and defend the land. So as people named their children after namesakes. So yeah, we had already shown a slide that had showed that the name Yeshua was on quite a few boxes. In fact, it was in the top 10, I believe, or 20 of the most listed names. And like I said, Simon was number one. Why Shimon was so high, I got to research that one. But Cameron has some legs because it did say Yeshua bar Yosef, son of Joseph. But again, Joseph was a hugely popular name as well. So you have to do a little bit more work than just finding the names. If we stayed consistent with the conviction of these people, and if they were to be buried with their fathers, Jesus' body wouldn't have landed in Talpiot. He would have had to go somewhere else to be gathered. So that's a very important point in just finding a name on someone's box. He was supposed to go to a place where his fathers would have been. And I would say Jesus is with his father, sitting at his right hand. So that's how I would respond to such a question. Yeah.
I don't know, you said something that sparked an interest, which was the recently dead, when Jesus died on the cross and the tombs were open, and God in his providence had those people's spirits remain with their bodies, sort of in a prison. And I wonder if this is what 1 Peter was referring to, 1 Peter 3, where it says Jesus died in the flesh, but was alive in the spirit, and preached to the spirits in prison.
Yeah, that goes a little bit farther than our discussion, and I will repeat that question. So the question is, in referencing those bodies that had raised while Jesus Christ died on the cross and there was an earthquake and the tombs had opened up and some of the saints were seen in Jerusalem, would this also have a corollary or a connection to the passage in 1 Peter about Jesus ministering in the Spirit? And I would say that the objective of Peter there was a little bit different in referencing that Jesus was being proclaimed already in the Old Testament and being proclaimed to the saints of old. I haven't chased down the kind of the premise for what you're bringing up, which is interesting to me. But because there is a discussion of the intermediary state when you die, you know, the scripture says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. In this situation, we're talking people who probably aren't under the new covenant resurrection. I'm probably going to get in trouble by what I say here offhand. But I would agree with you. Somehow God kept their spirits with their body, and they came up for the express reason of declaring the resurrection. I like the question. I'm just not ready to lay it all out right now. Yeah. I love getting in trouble. That's been my problem all my life.
That scripture you're referencing in Matthew, is that found in the earliest transcripts of the New Testament, or is it found later?
Okay, are we talking about critical or majority text? Is that where you're going with this, or?
Well, I just understood that particular passage
Oh.
was not found in the earliest transcripts. That's what I was.
Okay, yeah, that's another thing that I have to look at. I like the Textus Receptus, and I preach out of the New King James. So, yeah, some of my favorite verses aren't found in some of the critical texts, but that's another thing I'm going to get in trouble for, which is good because I'm sure I'll be doing this every 5 years, and I'll be working on that question. So thanks for bringing that up, too. Anything else?
Pastor, a question I have that we run into a lot is, now that there is a fully orbed and well thought out presentation of presuppositional apologetics that exists within the Reformed community and even larger in the evangelical community, is there still a value to the study and presentation of archaeological and historical evidences
That's nice.
to support and bolster the Bible itself?
Yeah. I hope you understood that question and heard the question about presuppositional apologetics and about realizing that from the outset, as people who are able to evaluate anything, we have a predisposition to embrace doubt and to say that nothing is true that exists that would make me look bad. It's like when you break your bone and you say, oh, it's just a sprain. I'll get through this. Spiritually, we tend to think we're not as bad off as we are. And presuppositional apologetics makes the case that a lot of your reasoning is already faulty from the very beginning. But having said that, the Lord, and the word providence was brought up, the Lord has providentially placed in front of us all kinds of data and information that helps us to determine what is real in this life. And what it does is it does two things. It becomes a measure of judgment for those who deny it and don't see the plain reality of what God has left for us that speak of his awesome power and will. The universe will judge us, if I can personify the universe, if we say that there is no God. You know, we say there's enough information to tell us a God, but not enough information to tell us what he's like. But we go through history and we find evidence after evidence which would support, again, the people, the places, and the practices of the scriptures, and that would indicate more and more that the Bible isn't some fairy tale book made up by a British scholar, you know, that it's actually the history of the earth, and that God was enacting a plan of salvation and redemption for his elect, and that God will take these evidences of the Bible, and if they come to your knowledge and you reject them, you have something else for which you will pay more wrath for. Incorrect grammar there. But they are of great assistance and strengthening to the believer who sees and recognizes that, you know, even more than the scriptures testify to the reality of God and his purposes, and that I can have confidence in my faith and sharing it and always being ready to give an answer to those who want to know about the hope that resides with us, and to do it with gentleness and respect. And we can say, hey, I can send you a link. Read this. You don't have to fight it out and beat it out, you know, in that venue. But that would be my twin response to that I embrace presuppositional apologetics, but I always find it handy to help believers understand that God has left a lot of details out in this world that help to point us back to him.
Pastor, could you tell people how to get a hold of you online or at your church?
Okay, well, I like being one of those John the Baptist guys who says he must increase and I must decrease. But for the sake of this presentation, I'm Kent Moorlach. I'm the pastor of Richland ARP Church in Rosemark, Tennessee. Little country church, little church, believes in a big gospel. And we have a website, richlandarp.org, and you can go to the little comment box and write away, and I will respond to you, unless you're crazy. But that's how you can get a hold of me.
How many people that we know from the scriptures have they found archaeological evidence for in Judea? I mean, like everybody from John the Baptist and so forth.
Yeah, this is what's great about the internet. You can go to your search engine and write all the people who are mentioned in the Bible who have been mentioned somewhere else. You know, so you find, Tiglath-Pileser. He's been mentioned. Sennacherib. I mean, it goes on and on. There's easily over 100 people who are mentioned in the Bible that are mentioned in other historical documents, whether they're on stones, edifices, or in papers, or in communication, or referenced by someone else. I mean, here's another thing. The whole thing about King David not being a real person. And you've got to get rid of David because you kind of get rid of Jesus that way. And more we continue to find more information about King David and his kingdom and his rule. So you can't discard Christianity and the relevance of its belief by saying there's no evidence for it in history. You just cannot say that, because there's just too much evidence. And even though you as an archaeologist can take the evidence and play with it, and we all sort of play with, we all have to interpret things. I mean, this is what the Supreme Court does. I see what the law says, and I can get Supreme Court justices going all over the room about what that really means and how that should be implemented, and that's kind of the way archaeology works. But the fact that this person's name has been found and in a particular location, and you read the Bible and it talks about places that you can visit today, and this is not Modor. This is history. And I'm ready to go take you on a trip to Israel if you're ready to go. I just need 10 people and I go free. No, I'm just teasing.